I'm going to move to our next question. This is particularly directed towards Nelson, but Peter, feel free to also jump in. So the urgency for climate change advocacy. How dire is the situation, and what are the potential immediate solutions?
Right. Again, I'm an optimist when it comes to solutions, but I really do believe that the starting point is to recognize the urgency of the problem, the severity of the problem. And I really feel that we're missing the boat. Most people don't understand how urgent this issue is. I mentioned in my opening remarks the idea of feedback loops. There are many, many feedback loops at play here, more than we even begin to know. In fact, I subscribe to a climate newsletter, and it seems like every other issue I read, they're discovering a new feedback loop that they had no idea about, last year. There was a recent report that the Atlantic Gulf Stream current flowing up into the northern latitudes is slowing. There was a massive die-off of seagrass off the coast of Australia this past spring, and seagrass absorbs a lot of carbon, and when it dies, it releases carbon. And most recently, there was a report on massive releases of nitrous oxide from the Tibetan Plateau. So there are these feedback loops that we don't understand. And I think what's most disturbing to me actually is a report that came out 2 days ago. And if you're interested, it's called The Trajectories of the Earth System and the Anthropocene. It was published by the the Proceeding of the National Academy of Science and authored by a group of world-leading scientists. And what they're arguing now is, because of these feedback loops, that there's a very real possibility that we could rapidly tip into what they're calling a hothouse Earth. And in this scenario, the temperature would be 7 to 9 degrees higher Fahrenheit than pre-industrial temperatures, with sea level rise of up to 200 feet. And to quote from the report, it says, "Our analysis suggests that the Earth system may be approaching a planetary threshold that could lock in a continuing rapid pathway toward much hotter conditions, a hothouse Earth. This pathway would be propelled by strong intrinsic biogeophysical feedbacks difficult to influence by human actions, a pathway that could not be reversed, steered, or substantially slowed." And the tipping point that they argue could exist at a temperature rise as low as 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures. So we're already over 1.2 degrees. And they do think that it's possible to create what they call a stabilized Earth trajectory, but it would require massive coordinated action, and they're arguing that time is running out. So having said that, we have to recognize the world that we are in. This is an urgent issue, and we need to face up to it honestly. And if we do that, there are solutions. That's the good news. Peter did a brilliant job with his slides showing the connection of animal agriculture to our food choices. And I also would like to throw into that lot of solutions the idea of a carbon fee and dividend program, which has been being promoted by the Citizens Climate Lobby. We probably don't have time to get into all the details of that, but it's the idea of charging a fee for carbon emissions, but with the revenues not going to government, but going back to the public in the form of sort of dividend payments. And that's why it's a bipartisan idea. Republicans and Democrats can get on board with that. But if you put that kind of price on carbon, you would unleash massive human innovation. And I'm an entrepreneur, and I have a sense of what's possible in terms of innovation. And so I think that's a powerful idea as well.
Great, thank you. Peter, did you want to respond or add anything, or should we move on?
We can move on. My guess is many people on the call are aware of the urgency of the situation. This has been known actually for 100 years, and people have been trying to advocate for climate action for decades. What's sad, I would just add, is what we mentioned before, there's this extraordinary political disinformation campaign. I brought a case on behalf of some local governments challenging one of the first climate change cases in the late 80s. And at that time, really, the science of climate change was not disputed. 20 years later, when we were in the US Supreme Court on an important climate change case, the science of climate change was said to be too uncertain to justify action. And the difference, of course, is during that time, the science had become much more solid and much more certain, and yet the political disinformation campaign had become much more aggressive, so that the public perception of the science was, and the political statement of the science was completely opposite to the reality. So in addition to it being an urgent situation scientifically, we are now at a place where it's urgent to get political change. Because without political change, we won't get the action.
The only thing I would, just to add to that, Peter, I agree that this has been well established, but I would push back a little on the idea that we understand the urgency. I think the vast majority of the public have no concept. The small number of us on this call may understand this, but the reason I raise this as an issue is we all have got to go stand on the street corner and go to the mountaintops and yell this out to the public in whatever way we can, because the public does not understand what we're talking about here.